Welcome, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am Marnie Ginsberg from Reading Simplified, where we streamline reading instruction and accelerate student reading achievement. And I'm so honored to bring a Reading Simplified expert, Adrienne Mormino, who is not just now super knowledgeable about Reading Simplified and helps us share how this system works. She's also had a long journey of transformation for herself and her family that I think will be a story that resonates with many of you. Thank you, Ashley, for popping in here. Who else is here? We're going to be giving some prizes away from those of you for those who comment. So be sure to say hi and let us know where you're coming from. So how many of you can relate to the feeling or the experience of maybe being a teacher and then you realize that you're not really that well prepared to teach reading? Or maybe you're a parent and you have a child that's going to a good school, but they're not succeeding in reading. And these types of stories are sweeping the country because of this so-called science of reading movement. And Adrienne's been on this journey for a long time. So her story is super exciting. We're going to be sharing about her story as a mom of a child who she realizes is dyslexic, but that's not where the story ends. It keeps going, and you're going to see some really neat graphs to show how an unusual set of circumstances led to a natural test of the Reading Simplified system. Adrienne's experience and mine and many simplifiers is that it's just a more efficient and effective approach to teaching reading. And I think Adrienne's a great person to tell that story and also to show this cool natural experiment that occurred, because she is not someone who has taken this challenge of having children or people in her community with dyslexia lightly. She's gone whole hog into the study of the science of reading. So she's a great person for us to have on our team, but also to be an example of that transformation. So I think you're going to really be impressed. Again, if you're just popping in, say hello and tell us where you're from. We're going to be drawing some names from those who comment. I've got this fun little wheel called Tiny Decisions, and I love to spin it to pick a winner. So make sure you say hello to Adrienne and cheer her on and ask questions too. But if you just popped in, you don't know who I am. I'm Marnie Ginsberg from Reading Simplified, and our job is to make the teaching of reading easier. Adrienne is an awesome mom, teacher, tutor, reading advocate who's going to share her experience. So I'm going to stop talking so much and let Adrienne have the chance to talk about her story. We're going to have I think, two big parts. Her story as a mom, teacher, tutor, and advocate, and then this particular story of Finley, a student who is dyslexic, and Adrienne helped lead a significant change in his life forever, really. So welcome, Diaz, and welcome, Mary Francis. So glad that you guys are here. You're now in the running for the prize, okay? So we're going to be drawing those prizes. All right, Adrienne, so I gave some intro, but what else would you like to say about yourself as a little backstory before we dig into your, I guess, does it start with your son? Where should we start with for your story?
Yeah, I think it does start with my son. I think it starts with the fact, though, that I do have a background in education. Mine started with early childhood. So I was a birth to 5-year-old teacher. And that's where I fell in love with teaching. And I started doing that kind of teaching even with little ones with dance when I was still in college. So I've had the teaching bug for a long time. I've got a whole family of teachers, both elementary teachers and high school teachers and middle school even. So, teaching is a big part of life. For me, learning is a big part of life. And so I think that's a good place to start. I think when I was in my first years of teaching, I was mainly teaching pre-K, and I hadn't had any specific training for reading. It was just fill your classroom with books, make sure there's lots of environmental print, and things are going to go well. You know, if you expose a lot of language, if you do a lot of read alouds, kids are going to learn to read.
Right.
But I
And
did.
how many of you in the audience have had that experience? I mean, that was my master's and literacy specialist license. I got a little bit more than that because I was K-12, but that represented a lot of what it was like. Surround them with books, and it's wishful thinking. Good luck. You're on your own. And Ashley's like, me. Okay, keep going.
Well, and I think what was interesting with that too is my bachelor's was in child development. And so it wasn't teaching degree from the education field yet. And in child development, there is very much an emphasis on supporting children as they grow developmentally. A huge emphasis on families and empowering families and in fact parents. And also just that you're supposed to be responsive. So if you see something that someone's struggling with, you don't ignore it. You pop in right then. There's no wait to fail model that we often see in education. And so I had lots of parents as a pre-K teacher asking me, like, is my child going to be ready with what you're doing for kindergarten? And because pre-K doesn't really focus on that, I wasn't really sure. So I did go back for my master's thinking, well, I better know what these kids need for kindergarten, and still only had one class in reading methods and still all the same instruction. Still very unprepared outside of those things I already knew. But I will say I was fortunate and with the National Association for Education of Young Children and being a member of that organization, because as phonemic awareness was coming online and those studies and the first national reading panel, I was hearing those things, but nobody quite knew about how to translate that for preschoolers yet, especially in instruction. But I knew it was an indicator. I knew it was something I needed to pay attention to see if kids were on the right track. So that was a big piece of my journey. And then I have this little boy who has had all experiences possible. I had writing centers for him. He had great preschool experiences. When we lived in the Washington, D.C. area, he had visits to the Smithsonian museums nearly every week. So we're talking lots of world and word knowledge going on. And we moved to Indiana, and he still wasn't learning to read in first grade. And every little piece of data I was getting back showed that phonemic awareness was in red. And that's not the thing you want to see as a and when I'd ask his teachers about it, they are wonderful. But it was a lot of the things we hear. They're going to catch on. You know, he's got so much understanding. When I say something about a bat, most kids say ball, and your son's talking about the entire stadium and the popcorn and all the things that go with it.
Yeah.
So he'll be fine. And he wasn't fine. And it started as all those little pieces of information were coming home for him to learn, all the poems for him to memorize, all the different pieces of language. He was wringing his little hands with a ton of anxiety, a lot of tears.
Even in kindergarten now.
Even in kindergarten and then into first grade.
For sure, for first grade. Okay.
Yeah. And I still didn't really know anything specific to do with him based on my training, outside of continuing to read stories with him and continuing to foster lots of routines around words. And at one point, and I think my mom might be even watching here today, but we decided, like, he was so far behind and even learning his letters in pre-K and kindergarten and letters, whether it was the sounds or the names, that we went ahead and like bought some $400 curriculum that was whole words, whole word memorization kind of a program, because we just weren't getting answers from the
Yeah.
school or anywhere else.
Well, and
Or,
just to interject, this is a very common experience for families who have a child who ends up finding out they have dyslexia. They have plenty of books in their background, in their family, just like Adrienne. I mean, I send Adrienne to answer deep research questions for Reading Simplified. She is a wide reader, and I'm sure that there, with these precious children, that there were lots and lots of stories, and you don't know about all the things in a baseball stadium when you're 4 or 5, unless you've been really exposed to a lot of language. And yet, language alone does not make a reader, and so it's so common for teachers to have that kind of explanation for the parent. Oh, it's okay. Look at all that he can do. He must be fine because he's smart, and then it will come. I've even heard teachers say that as late as 7th grade. I mean, that's an extreme outliner, and that was a while ago, but we need to stop saying that, and we need to be aware of these early warning signs and then what to do, to your point. Like, you were a trained teacher, you were also a concerned mom, and you did not know what to do, and now you know full well that you wouldn't go for whole words
right.
for a child who was struggling with all these phonemic awareness pieces. But that was all that you had, with only these kind of things off into the side about language, about phonemic awareness, and they didn't really present like, this is what you do, step 1, step 2. So I just wanted to emphasize how common that is. And if you're here and have a question for Adrienne, let us know, or encouragement for her. We're going to be drawing from whomever's here and get some winners from my cool little wheel of Reading Simplified. Okay, so you're in this dilemma. You're starting to probably wring your hands too, right, Adrienne Mama?
Well, of course, yeah. And it was a lot of striving. It was finding connections. I had a serendipitous sort of connection with another mom who started describing her son and his struggles and named it as dyslexia. And I had never come across that term outside
Wow.
of this. And so, she got me on a path, and I started really digging in and learning. And thankfully, I had some sources of information, but most of them were about an hour away. We didn't have an infrastructure here in our community for learning disabilities, and to learn to navigate the school system for supports, as well as what's outside the school system, was a lot. So it took, I'm one of the privileged who was already just working part-time. So I could do a lot during the day and run my son where he needed to go. And once we found a tutor, and we found a certified Barton tutor, but 25 minutes away from us. And so that was, 3 or 4 days a week that we would make that drive with 2 other little ones in my car. And so we did that. We did week-long, actually month-long summer camp, an hour away.
Wow.
To close some gaps. And we had testing inside school and outside school, and he was not found eligible inside the school district.
Whoa.
And so it was a struggle. So it all fell on our shoulders. And during breaks or when tutors weren't available and things, I borrowed the Next Level book, and I did that work on my own with him. And it took a lot. It took a whole lot.
And a lot of money too, besides the time.
A lot of money too. A lot of time, a lot of money. And so eventually my husband and I did start, along with a whole nother group of professionals and community members, a not-for-profit organization under our community ARC, to help inform parents and bring some more awareness to this issue. We started with the launch of the Big Picture Rethinking Dyslexia in our little community theater, and
Cool.
brought in a panel of experts from the International Dyslexia Association and Decoding Dyslexia and others, to bring people together. And we eventually launched a pilot program in our schools with a whole class Orton-Gillingham based method.
Wow.
So we did that for a number of years until we felt that that was sustained in the school district. And, then just supported families navigating really the special education area.
And so you start serving others. Is that because your son is now like succeeding and you're less panicked about it?
Sort of.
Or that was like that you're just doing double dipping and you're still doing
I mean, it's never, you think they've got it, and then curriculum changes and curriculum gets harder, and you're thrown under the bus again. So it's not necessarily ever a clear path, but we did find good resources and found out enough trusted information to start to help others. And at the same time, we had other psychologists in our area that were coming on board and getting more training themselves. And so, like, all of a sudden, things kind of started popping up. And it wasn't just us anymore, and we could point to more services. So it was a really kind of one of those wonderful timing sort of issues. And our state started to look at laws and what we needed to do that way too. So a lot more awareness was coming online.
Yeah. And so when do you think that greater awareness started?
Well, I would say, was it about 2017, 2018 was big in the state of Indiana with our first passages of dyslexia laws.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and actually Roxy has a neat question here, because I know your work is so much about advocacy. Roxy says, do you think this program, I think she's probably talking about Reading Simplified, but you were also mentioning how you were using Barton, which is an Orton-Gillingham method. Do you think this program works with a child at, say, first grade with speech delay and pretty sure he may have dyslexia, does well in math, but is struggling with reading and phonics, even private and school interventions?
It's from both, right? For Barton has very clear criteria for whether they think a child and tutor are a good match for their program. So there's good criteria for that. And oftentimes if there's a speech delay or a speech articulation issue, there's other things that need to occur before Barton tutoring would start. And also there's some screeners for an educator to determine if that they can even use Barton. And a lot of that has to do with an educator's phonemic awareness knowledge. But in terms of Reading Simplified, absolutely. There's no question.
Okay, that was it. Well done. Yeah, both Adrienne and I have worked with children who struggled, and that's what we're going to hear soon is one of Adrienne's students. And I've worked with many that had speech challenges, and there is a strong correlation between speech challenges and reading problems, because possibly because of the phonological, the sound-based challenges that child may have. They may be overlapping and they hinder the beginning parts of reading. But one of the things that we here at Reading Simplified do really well is dig into that phonemic awareness, that phonological awareness domain, and make it much stronger. And we do it connected to print, real words, real reading, real spelling. And in fact, let me just do a little pitch real quick on a related topic. We're going to be hosting this one of our biggest events of the year, and it relates to kind of this question of how do you resolve an issue when there's phonological awareness, phonemic awareness problems. So we are hosting the 5-day reading breakthrough coming up October 16th. It's going to be 5 days of about 30 minutes each day where we train you in how to try just one simple activity. It's super easy, and you get the resources you need to do it, and we coach you and encourage you along the way, and we see kids rocket ahead with just this one simple activity. You're also going to see how one child moves ahead with this one simple activity. And it's integrating phonemic awareness, the perception of individual sounds and words, into real reading, moving letter sounds around to really understand how the code works. So if you want to get into that, I'll drop a link. So because it will not just help Roxy, it will help anyone who has kids who don't know their letter sounds or poor at phonemic awareness, have dyslexia, or just starting as readers. And I'm even using it right now with a 50-year-old who has dyslexia. So it's not something that's just for 4-year-olds. Okay, so we're back with your work with the ARC. And the changes is coming. And
change is
what's
definitely
next?
coming. Well, and I think importantly, I have 2 more children who start to struggle, and not always for the exact same reason, that are eventually, and some of that is because I knew some preventative work at this point. I'd done enough study to know if some of the things that I could supplement with. And so I had done that with my younger 2. So they certainly have never struggled with such severity.
Good.
Yeah, but they've also have other language difficulties too. Speech articulation, delayed a severe auditory processing disorder. So we have some other things going on, but now I have a much better understanding of how to navigate the school system, though it's not perfect. We're denied services more and more still. It's again, like it's put on our shoulders to figure out what we need to do.
And what does the low income person do in that situation?
And that's why we did the advocacy work we've done, is because there aren't great solutions.
Right.
And that's a big part of why I was looking in 21, 22. I'd already had 2 full Orton-Gillingham based trainings. But they were kind of whole class, and they were preventative approaches. And I wasn't really given permission to use them with children really struggling. Like there's some tiers of supports. You have to have more practicums or further and further and further training. And I hadn't used it day in and day out like a classroom teacher, even though I had training. And so I didn't feel comfortable picking that up and trying it out with someone else's kid very much. So I've always been looking for programming that is easier to explain to a parent, that is more accessible to a parent. And I first found some information with structured word inquiry and would watch every single IDA conference webinar from the Upper Midwest branch. They did some really great things for a really long time, and they still do. So there were nuggets, but nothing really affordable and really great. And I started having more and more families knocking on my door and saying, hey, I can't find tutors in this time of COVID, and I'm seeing more about their instruction that concerns me, and their just kids weren't doing well. So what are we going to do? And so that's kind of when I decided, well, I need some more training, but I'm not going to spend another $1,200 to get more training somewhere. And I want elements that I can share with anyone. And I also started, just really looking at the Science of Reading Facebook group and reading more books. And some of Kilpatrick's work was coming forward, and some of Emily Hanford's work was coming forward. And I kept hearing about Reading Simplified and how it was a little bit different, and that there was still training, which I think is really important, that it's not just an open and go system that anyone can pick up, that you have to do some training first. I think that's still important, but that there are elements that you can learn fairly quickly and that anyone can learn fairly quickly and use with any child.
And why is it important to have that training and not just an open and go in your position as a reading advocate?
There's just too many missed opportunities then. I think data is what leads what we can do with children and where we need to start. And if it's an open and go, we usually open up to the very beginning first lesson and we start there. And lots of times that's not what the child needs.
Right.
And so we're not giving opportunity for acceleration then. And we're not keeping kids as close to grade level as possible. And there's so much damage that we do if we can't make that happen. The opportunity gap is one of the pieces of work that really zeroed me in on that, and it's a big deal for minority children and children in poverty that we accelerate growth. Because they can't always show us right away what they know, and we have to find out and from there and build pretty rapidly.
So important because if a program is going to take 4 years to get a child to grade level, most people will tap out their time or their resources as families by then. And the child will be very discouraged. That's a lot of time where they start to perceive themselves as a failure in this main thing that they do every day, which is go to school. They can't read the math, they can't read the science, they can't read the history, and their identity starts to become fixed. We even see kindergartners who already perceive themselves to be failures. So it's really important what Adrienne's saying about getting acceleration into the hands of everyone during and after COVID more than ever, probably. And that, I think you're so right that only happens in regard to reading anyway, when we really get the good data and we zero in on what the child needs and not center their instruction on a program. It's not the beginning of the program, it's the beginning of where they are. Go ahead.
I also will say another big cost for children and families, and it doesn't matter where they come from, is on the other missed opportunities if we're spending too much time in tutoring.
Oh, right.
And intervention. So if children are pulled out too much in intervention inside of school, they're missing out on social studies and science and other topics that can build knowledge and language that they need. And if we're pulling them too much or for too much of a duration outside of school, then they're missing out on sports and music and other opportunities that they might be able to have as well, that foster some of their strengths and give them just a sense of joy.
Yeah. I mean, where's the baseball or the ballet fit into 3 or 4 days a week of intensive tutoring? So I'm going to take this is going to be a little break, and I'm just going to flip through these names, and I pick out Roxy Kirk. Thank you for participating. I hope you're still here, Roxy, because we're going to reset my wheel. We're going to draw something for you. Thanks for being here. And if you guys have experience, like Adrienne's talking about, kids who need acceleration but they're not getting it, let us know. Okay. You get a Reading Simplified sticker. I don't have one handy to show you, but we'll send it in the mail to you. If you give us your email address, your mailing address, either in Messenger, which is easy because we're in the Facebook platform right now, or I'm going to write your name down. Usually I have my Greg helping us, but it's the middle of the night for him there in the Philippines. So thanks, Roxy. And that was actually her question. I was kind of randomly picking her out from above earlier. Okay, so you started doing Reading Simplified, or you discovered Reading Simplified. What's next?
Well, I jumped in on a couple of your free events. I think the 3 activities a day to keep reading difficulties at bay was, I'm not sure if I completely got that title right, but that's basically
pretty good. I like yours better, actually. 3 activities a day to keep reading difficulties away, but at bay is pretty cool.
So I started there, and I still wasn't fully convinced that this is where I wanted to go. So I kept looking a little bit, but then kept coming back to the acceleration piece that you promised, in the simplified pathway, and that it really was for any age, and any setting. And I think that's a really, really important piece, because even though I had had training, and as I said, that I wasn't given permission to use it in all settings. And if a child is found to have decoding difficulty, then I needed a place to start, and that maybe not at the beginning. So I did really appreciate the 3 streamlined pathways, and they deliver right away. I also wasn't sure, because of my previous training with structured word inquiry and morphology, I didn't want to spend tons of time in phonics. Right? Like, at some point, there's other layers of language that I know a child needs. And I could kind of play around with that a little bit. And so this was, for me, a really nice dovetail, because structured word inquiry and Reading Simplified don't focus on rules or syllable types. At some point, structure of the English language with morphemes makes a little bit more sense than just sounds. And so I could work within that and use what I knew, without having to do a full another morphology class.
Cool.
Yeah. And this is really when I launched. I was in about 2 or 3 weeks, and I heard from a parent who I had talked to back in September and helped them navigate the testing system. And this is, into just a week or 2 into January, and this parent says, "Hey, I can't find a tutor. We have the testing. We've been told it's dyslexia. We don't have the report yet back. I'll get that to you in a week or 2, but can you help me out?" And she was clearly looking for Orton-Gillingham based instruction. I mean, that's what any dyslexic parent is told, is that that's the gold standard, and that's the only thing that's going to work. But it's really not. There are other ways, and there are more evidence-based ways, from what I'm ascertaining at this point. And so I asked her, I said, "Hey, I'm getting this training. Do you mind, as I'm learning, if I can do this?"
Little guinea pig, huh?
Let's do it.
Which is part of the Reading Simplified Academy training. We want you to find a child, your own, someone else's, test these activities, just a handful of them out. So she said yes, huh?
She said yes. And it was great, because one of the grandparents of this child is a special education teacher. And so I got a little bit of extra questioning of, like, let's look at these 2 things. And so we did some of that, and we still decided to give it a go. And I think what's really important, I shared that this child was just identified for an IEP, so he was going to get services, and he was going to get, a little bit every day. And so that's a good thing. And we had this report, and this is a severely dyslexic child. And I don't share that data in the blog, but he was at the second percentile for word recognition.
Wow.
For single word reading, he was at the 6th percentile. His phonological processing was at the 10th, and his nonsense word decoding was at the 16th. So pretty significant, but also his fluency at the time was at the 2nd percentile, and his overall reading comprehension was at the 8th percentile. So it wasn't super clear when you just look at those numbers. Do we have more of a reading comprehension language difficulty in addition? Except when we read between the lines in the assessment, it was pretty clear that everything did have to really do with word reading. And so I did feel like Reading Simplified was going to be the best first step And it became very clear very quickly that this child had no difficulties with syntax. He had no difficulties with language comprehension, inference, anything else. We'd read a sentence and he'd start to elaborate and make jokes about it. Like this
Awesome.
language
Those are
comprehension was
fun.
difficult. Yeah. And we launched right away. I knew from his report that he was good with CVC. He could blend CVC. He knew his consonants. He had a little bit of difficulty with vowels, and really any vowel. He
Don't
had
they
a lot.
all?
Of,
It's like
a lot of
the vowels. Let's start with the vowels.
all those vowels. And he had difficulty with anything beyond a CVC level. So CVC or CCV, So
Right.
I was able to jump in right with Switch It from our first lesson. I had him read a passage that I kind of thought was a beginning second grade level, because the report also said he could access second grade text. But he was middle of third grade and he
Wow.
could not access, mid second grade and above. So it wasn't. I kind of knew where he was.
Yeah. So
So
you
we
were
did
playing. You were doing this with paper, probably, right?
Yeah, I was doing it with the back of our board
Dry erase
and
board. Yeah.
dry erase board. Yes, but that's exactly the kind of word we started with. I think lamp and clamp were two words that he had to switch in our first lesson.
Awesome. Good. Wow. Okay. That's a coincidence I had that up there. This is Switch It, you guys. And I didn't do the important part because we put the burden on the child. We say, you have a lamp. Actually, we would do it with some kind of, tactile reinforcement of what we're doing with our mouth. You have a lamp. And we need to switch it to clamp. So what do we need to add over here? This is a little different from a lot because usually we just switch, we don't add, but the child comes up with k and you say, yeah, which one is k? And they pull it down and they say k, and then we check the word k, l, a, m, p. And then we would change it to clump maybe, and they start to get really good at their vowels and their phonemic processing. So that was something that worked for him, huh?
It worked really quickly for him. Really quickly for him.
And I just put up this 3-component lesson plan because Reading Simplified, as Adrienne said a minute ago, it's something that works with all ages. So we do this with a 4-year-old, 5-year-old. We also do it with a 3rd grader. I'm doing the same thing with a 50-year-old. So was this kind of the structure of what you were doing? And what was different?
Yes. I started with Switch It and Read It for only about 3 lessons, and then continued with some Switch It, but moved right into Sort It, and very quickly added in Write It as well.
And the whole time you're reading new texts that align with the vowel that you're studying, which is probably something over here on somewhere on this pathway, I believe. Did you start with 2nd grade pathway with him, as I recall? Because that's what you said. He was able to access some 2nd grade text. So you got up to, after you started with 1 down here at the bottom, and then you pretty quickly got into the advanced phonics where we would do sort it and do the O sound and its various spellings.
Yeah, and our time really at that first level, like I said, was only two or 3 lessons, and we worked a lot on blend as you read because he liked to skip things, and a lot on paying attention to function words as we continue to do guided oral reading because he often would skip those words. But he came out of that really quickly, and I didn't even have to use the point game. Yeah, so we moved into sorted, and the O sounds really gave him a run for his money. He was pretty good with A sound words and some E sound words, but the O sound, it didn't seem like he had a lot of those interaction with those spellings before that. The OE was especially difficult, like in the guided oral reading where we have that they're going skiing in the Mo, I think. is in that one. I might have that mixed up a little bit, but that OE and Mo gave him a really, really hard time. But we did that work, and I had done in my assessment ahead of time, his school assessment had shown that he could fairly easily decode the first 200 sight words,
Wow.
but he was kind of breaking down in that second set of 200 words. So I had done a quick just sort, like see how automatic he was, and had a pile of the words he didn't know, and then sorted those according to the pathway.
Nice.
And would, after a lesson or two of O sound words, go through that, and he'd nail them after a couple of lessons. So
Wow.
we moved really quickly.
So he was relying on a whole word approach before, probably because all of those sub skills that you showed earlier were so low. And now you're teaching him how to decode, how to actually get how the sounds and symbols relate, and it's working. And then it enables these words to stick, which probably wouldn't have stuck before because his brain had maybe tapped out at 200.
Yeah,
For
and
whole
it
words.
was really interesting because he was catching on really quickly with me. And things were sticking. And all the information I was continuing to get from the school is it takes 14 repetitions of him spelling these words to get these sounds. And they're still only focusing on one sound at a time. And so we were outpacing school instruction a lot. Now they were focused more on spelling than reading, and it was still slowing his reading down.
Yeah. Okay. So then
Yeah.
you got some testing. Should we move over to that?
Yeah, because this is what's exciting. So in the first semester of working with him, and again, I didn't start till mid-January, maybe kind of the end of January. We had breaks, we had illness, we had all those kinds of things, and we were meeting 2 times a week for really only 30 to 45 minutes. And this was his growth in that one semester. So he was going, from below the 10th percentile to about the 40th to 47th percentile, and nearly hitting his peers in just that one semester.
Wow. That's what you wouldn't have expected that with another program with a child with his profile, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. And what's really kind of fun is I didn't know any of this. Like, I didn't get this data until the winter of 23. So we had all this progress, and I was keeping track in my own notes and seeing progress. But because the only data we had at the time was that he didn't pass his state testing, which was disappointing. And at the same time, okay, it's only been one semester, and we had seen a lot of growth, and he was encouraged, and he's now reading books at his sister's volleyball matches and, on his own, which is never a thing.
Right.
So we're seeing progress, and more is sticking. But yeah, I had not seen this data at this point, which I think is really fun,
Wow.
even more fun.
And then after you're seeing success, and it's not just in their tutoring situation, it's transferring into the real world, and he's choosing to read. Kids under the 10th percentile, under the 5th percentile with reading, almost never choose to read with good reason. Like that's me, like choosing to be a physicist. It's not going to work. So then you hit the summer. And what happened in the summer?
Well, in the summer, partially based on my recommendation.
Oh,
because,
I didn't remember that.
yeah. My son had really benefited from a 1-month camp with one-on-one instruction and
More intensity than you could
more,
give.
more intensity, and very importantly, the element that these children are then meeting other dyslexic children
Oh.
and learning
Yeah.
alongside them and hearing from adults with dyslexia. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole lot going on in a month camp for
Wonderful.
these.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely amazing. And my own son had experience equivalent of a year's growth
Oh
in 1 month.
my. Oh
He
wow.
went
Okay.
camp. So we were everyone's super excited. Like, this is going to give a boost. He gets a little bit of a change of pace. He doesn't have to come to my house when he wants, and he's getting full camp. Like, they're swimming,
Mm-hmm.
they're backpacking, they're doing all the things. This
Yeah.
will be great. And then it was vacations and other things, and we have about an 8-week summer here. And so I wasn't going to see him for most of the summer, but he was going to have this wonderful experience at this camp. And all the all the engagement pieces and all the social emotional pieces, they all panned out.
Oh, good. Okay.
But the data on learning
Yeah.
um, didn't pan out, and he regressed.
Let me get there. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. So the school does a standardized assessment in the late spring. He goes to camp. That's emotionally positive, but academically, doesn't just stay steady. After an intensive month, he drops in the early fall. This is, the school will bookend the year with assessment. So this is probably pretty early in the late in the year and then early in the new year, and we see a fall. And so we've got actually now a single subject experimental design going on, because there was the A condition was Reading Simplified. The B condition was, what was the B condition? Just general Orton-Gillingham, or was it a particular program, or were we just?
I'm going to say general.
Okay, general Orton-Gillingham, which had served your son.
Yes.
And then they came back to you, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so he came back to me then in the fall. And the notebook that we received from his summer training showed that, I had taken him almost through the entire pathway. We were still a little bit working on some of those endings, like ION and ED and things. But I had taken him most of the way through the pathway. And the
So it's a
instruction,
lot of advanced phonics knowledge.
whole lot of advanced phonics knowledge and getting into multi-syllable words and Flexit. And so, you've got some issues at that point, I think, because when you're not reading all the time at a single word level anymore, and you're starting to learn that, these vowels can also have a schwa, and they can, sometimes say they're long and sometimes say that they're short, depending on the word they're in. The test they gave, were all single syllable words, and he didn't do it well. And so they chose to take him back all the way to the very beginning, basic sounds, and retaught all consonants and short vowels. And he never got the advanced vowels with them in this.
Okay.
So, my thinking there is just, we really have to be aware of the instruction students have already had, and not, I know our nonsense word tests are a good indicator of decoding, but if they've already have experienced some success down the path to fluency, I don't know. That's one of those things that keeps spinning in my head but for their fidelity's sake for the summer, they chose to take it back to the very beginning.
So you've seen great growth, and he was able to read books, but yeah, it may probably surprise you that he wasn't perfect with all short vowel words.
Oh, no.
And how do you hold that tension? Like, is he just on it's just, tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that is a hard tension, because some things aren't solid, but you're also giving access. And it is a bigger deal in my thinking for a now fourth grader to start giving access to complex text and get them as close to that as possible. And so I will at some point transfer to super accurate decoding to access to text. And, that might, I mean, he has most of his sight, those first 300 high frequency words, he had those down by now, in a text, in a sentence, he can read any single syllable word. He's now struggling only with multi-syllable words. So
that's where you should be functioning,
that's
right?
kind of where you should
Instructionally.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you get him back, and then
I get
what
him
happens?
back. Well, because of some of what happened during the summer and some additional testing at school, mom and writing wasn't keeping up with reading. So we'd seen some boosts in reading, but writing and spelling weren't keeping up. So we did kind of, once we got through the word endings again, and did some additional assessment, I did decide, well, it's okay to do the second and up pathway again, but let's do this a little bit more with a spelling focus. And so we did a whole lot of sort it with even more advanced words, more multi-syllable words. And then we did a lot more dictation and sentence writing. And here and there, I did bring in a couple of the techniques from Ebley's spelling, just because he after the summer and learning to mark and do some things that way, he kind of just decided he liked that. So that was a way to stay a little bit more true to a speech to print approach, but give him a little bit of that because
Cool.
he's learned it.
I like it.
Yeah, so we just did that. And then at this point for reading text, we had kind of exhausted even the 4th and 5th grade texts at this point in Reading Simplified.
Awesome.
And so I was pulling a lot of text from the textproject.org, Dr. Elfrida Hybert's work, and phonic books. And so we did somewhat here and there switch up the order in which we did, just because phonic books is a specific order.
Phonic Books is a program that has a lot of decodable text, and they have the same sound focus. So they would organize the text by a sound, like the O sound, which Adrienne was talking about earlier, and they just have a slightly different scope and sequence. So that makes sense. I think they start with A instead of O.
Yeah, and because they're catch-up readers, tell one big story across the whole set. You have to follow
Just
that
go
a little
right,
bit.
the story order. Great. So you were, and then was he happy? Was he feeling good about his reading and all those emotional and motivational things? What were they like in the fall?
Yeah, he was. I would say, this was a time where he was more frustrated at school, a little bit more difficulty accessing his text at school. So in addition, maybe one lesson a week I would use those other text sources, and then another day a week I was trying to get access to text that he was using at school, or finding additional text on the topics he was using at school, to make some of that a little bit easier and start those discussions with him. And we still had great progress.
Yeah, let's show it off. There is the spring when Adrienne went back to Reading Simplified, and she was also focusing on more and more on text reading.
Yeah.
And less on word work. And it was hard text reading. Back to your point about that was possibly one of the weaknesses of the summer experience. When you go back down to the beginning, there's only so much challenging things you can encounter in single syllable land.
Right. And so now he's surpassing students at his grade level. He's now at the 63rd percentile for text reading.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
We're talking about a child with significant dyslexia markers with the 2nd percentile in a year, with some changes in instruction to get not just to grade level but beyond. A lot of research on dyslexia will get a kid to maybe the 35th or 40th percentile and say, look at us, we did great. That's average. It is low average, but He's not average, he's surpassing average. I bet he continues to improve now that you've given him these skills. He was lacking that sound-based decoding foundational skill set, and he needed to apply it to the text instead of looking at words as wholes. And he needed to get into a lot of complex text. I love how Adrienne pointed out earlier that there's this opportunity gap. The longer you don't have access, or you have access that's only giving you short vowel words, you're missing out on the real readers are reading advanced complicated text with lots of vowel irregularities and multisyllable words. So you paved the way for him to do that really quickly with the instruction that you gave him. It's really cool. 99% more progress than his peers. I get to use my applause. So it is amazing. Have you kept in touch? This was just this January. He was in the 63rd percentile. Are you keeping in touch?
Yeah, we do keep in touch, and I still do some work with him online now because they have moved out of state.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's great. I mean, we have our routines down, so moving online was pretty easy. And I'm so grateful for a whiteboard and a marker. Those tools just make it an easy transition. And we're using still really complicated texts. And so
Love it.
now the focus is really more on continuing to work on those multisyllabic words. Those texts keep getting harder. They keep getting longer. Mm-hmm. So, and he is a child who had significant difficulties, and those don't really go away. He's got a lot of access. He's way better off than he would be. But as school increases as he needs more stamina, it's not like he doesn't need support.
Okay.
He still does need support.
Yeah, and a lot of reading will be really a great service to him. Lots of wide reading and maybe even listening along so he can keep those eyes on the text, because he's going to need a higher dose than a typically developing reader to be able to access them and spell them.
Yes, yeah. Yes, that's right.
So I hope something today resonated with you all. I'm so honored that Adrienne told her story. She was awesome. It's an amazing story. It's not just her experience as a mom. No, it's also this advocacy work, because there's so many people out there like you, possibly teachers and parents, who are frustrated, and you understand, maybe if you've tried this path, you've understand all the challenges that Adrienne experienced, getting her son help, getting other people help. And Reading Simplified is one solution that is more efficient and effective, because it's quicker to get into the hands of the parent or the tutor or the teacher. And it's also then quicker to get the kid access to the advanced print, the exposure that they need to. And you're not doing that because in a way that's not providing them what they need. I think a lot of people who see things happen fast, and if they have that Orton-Gillingham background, they may think, well, there's probably some holes, or, I'm doing things thoroughly and I'm working towards mastery. And so that's another tension. What would you say to that?
It is another tension. I would just say there's a lot of good research on mass practice and interleaving practice and spaced practice, and Reading Simplified at this point lines up a whole lot better with those, what children need when for practice. And I'm not going to articulate that well, so that's as far as I'll leave you. Type those words, do a search, find your research. But I think it fits better with that. I think it also, we know now, and you've brought this to a lot of people's attention, the idea of mispronunciation correction are set for variability. And we don't have to get a word correctly each and every time we decode a new word. We can get an approximation and figure it out from there. Mm-hmm. And that is not necessarily something everyone would be comfortable with in other trainings. I can't say for sure. I think one of my favorite things about Reading Simplified is that because it's not hugely published, you're not getting this gigantic manual. And I know we have plans for some of that, but you're not getting this gigantic manual that you've spent $200 on
Much less.
yet. Um, you've been able to shift and add in
Right.
some of the new pieces of research as they have come online,
Right.
as that research has come online and had enough consensus to say, yeah, this is the way we need to go. And some Orton-Gillingham branded programs and unbranded approaches can do that too, and
Right.
are doing that too.
Right.
So I think it's important. There's lots of different options, and there's lots of different training and lots of different time on training. And I think the more gets shifted, the more streamlined those are going to become too. I think Reading Simplified has just gotten there sooner.
Yeah, there are programs like UFly is a good example to me. They've actually taken a lot more of the contemporary research. We know so much more, and they're putting it into a program which kind of has the shell of an Orton-Gillingham program, but it's not stuck with something that's was around in 1930, because we actually have learned a lot. And my theory is that some of the programs have a harder time shifting because for so long it seemed to be that there was only one answer, and they were so much better than whole language. So innovation hasn't been part of the lifeblood of a lot of programs under that Orton-Gillingham label, but we are desperate for more rapid progress for our kids. So we need to be looking at the
Families
science.
are desperate.
Yeah.
Families need it. Families need stuff now. And so when we know that it isn't just one label of a program that we need to work with any child who's struggling with word recognition skills, we still have to be careful, but it does open up possibilities with access.
Well, if you're new to Reading Simplified or you haven't ever given us a try, please do give us a try. With just a great place to see how we do training and see how one activity that helped Adrienne's student succeed. We teach in this 5-day breakthrough. I've got the link in the chat so you can sign up. You'll get the resources you need to be able to do it, test it out. You can even use for over a month. You can use this tool so you don't have to cut up any letter sounds. That's helpful. And then once you get in, you get access to our Reading Breakthrough portal where you get the resources that you need, like these things, like the workbook about what we're going to do for each of the 5 days. It's only 30 minutes. You'll get how to do Switch It and all the things you need to test it out, especially how to move kids forward, because people say, oh yeah, I do word chains. And I know indeed most people are now doing word chains, but there are a couple of diagnostic questions which are pivotal for Switch It. And I'm sure Adrienne is a master of them, and she's helped. That's one of the things that helped her with her student is she didn't say here because he was sometimes struggle with CBC. She pushed him ahead with just two simple questions actually, and that's where you get the instructional match. That's where you get the acceleration. That's back to the beginning of our time together. If you do open and go, you follow the program and you're not following the child, as Maria Montessori would say, and it's just going to slow us down. So you get what you need in this big event, and we'd love for you to join us. And we'll even have a really great offer for getting the full training after that if you're interested. But this is a nice taste of Reading Simplified, so to speak, so you can see if you like our training and if that one activity works like we claim. So we've got some thanks from Ashley and Deb and two Debs that really appreciate you saying your story. I agree. And I think maybe we should wrap it up then. Thank you so much, Adrienne. You've been very generous with your time and sharing your own personal story and your family. So I hope many people hear this. Yes. Okay. Until next time, here's to making great readers.